Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the President and CEO of McGraw-Hill Education, David Levin, and our distinguished panel.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to what is, I think, going to be an outstanding panel because we've got a fantastic group of panelists. In the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be exploring a very crucial subject. With the quality of the talent here, I could spend most of 30 minutes introducing any one of the individuals here. So we're not going to do that. As each of them speaks, I'll call them out and give you a quick snapshot of who they are. But the crucial dilemma that we're facing here is that across our economic system as a whole, we're facing in business, in society at large, a terrible skills gap. And that's manifest both at the top of the tree, both for the very high qualified people, and at the same time for middle skills. And that's an interesting contrast with what's happening as people feed through the educational system and emerge probably unprepared for those skills. So today we've got a panel which comprises great people with great experience in government, with great experience in the academy, business leaders and policymakers, and people pragmatically addressing the problems that we've got there. So that's the shape of our session today. And with that, I want to open up first by calling on Judy Marks. Judy is the CEO of Siemens in the USA, and it's got a rich history in manufacturing across many places. Judy, as we open up on that subject, how real is the skills gap to you as an employer, and what does it mean to you?
Well, David, I can tell you that the skills gap is real across this whole nation. On behalf of our 50,000 employees in all 50 states, including 10,000 manufacturing employees and 60 manufacturing plants, we have a demand today, and I'm not unique as an industry leader. We have a demand for technical skills that start in the middle skill level, that start with advanced manufacturing, and that range all the way up through data scientists. We were founded by an entrepreneur almost 170 years ago. We've been in this country 160 years. And let me just give you one example of how broad that skills gap is. On any given day, we probably have 1,500 to 2,000 openings in Siemens here in the US. And I'll just give you one vignette. Many of you may have taken the train with Amtrak here today. We are the proud supplier of the locomotives that brought you here. But those are not just locomotives. They're not just mechanical trains. They are data sensors. There's 800 different sensors on those trains collecting data every day. So not only when we build these in Sacramento do we need welders and mechanics and all of those skills and assembly technicians, but we also need data scientists to take all that remote information and reduce to practice and make it real so that we can do remote diagnostics and keep the trains running faster and on time. Fantastic. So we're proud to be here today and proud to be part of the digital revolution because that's where we're all heading.
Right, fantastic. So with that in mind, let me ask Eduardo Padron, running the largest higher educational institution in the country down there in Miami, grappling at the moment with a crane which has fallen on one of your buildings, so we know that you've got other problems. And we should also say that we know you'll be leaving a few minutes early to catch a flight back to Miami. But Eduardo, as you listen to Judy there and you think about the configuration of higher ed to meet the needs that she's articulating there across the range, what are the key lessons that you want to bring out for us to make higher ed deliver what the economy is needing?
Well, I think we need to be more and more aware that business is the consumer of our students, our product, which is graduates. And we need to make sure that those students have the skills that Judy has been talking about. And the only way that we have found to do it in such a way that we are successful is by working very closely with business. From the moment of developing the program to make sure that we have business representatives on our advisory boards for every program that we have, to make sure that we're teaching the right skills for the students. I can tell you in the last 5 years, we have created a significant number of programs in data analytics, cybersecurity, logistics, supply chain. I could go on and on and on and on. And every one of those programs would have not been possible if we had not partnered with business to be able to understand the skills that are needed, the expertise that the faculty should have, providing professional opportunities for our faculty to develop, as well as providing internships, very much needed, internships for our students to be able to get real-world experience.
Now, I think one of the other things that you're well known for is those bridging programs which are bringing people through from high school to college. We've got a terrible graduation and completion problem here. What are you doing to address that? Because you've got to feed the funnel.
Well, for a long time, we in higher ed have been criticizing high schools for not providing students with the skills. And it's true that many of the students are not coming well prepared. But we need to be part of the solution. And one of the things that we decided a few years back is that we needed to partner with the schools. And right now, we have a partnership with every school in our system where we have pre-college advisors working with them that are there all the time. We have programs to really advise the students and the parents about career opportunities, telling them what skills we need, but also faculty-to-faculty programs. So the teachers in the schools know what skills the students need to have in order to be successful once they get to college. We have a very robust dual enrollment program too, to provide students with the opportunity to begin to get a feel for college, enrolling in courses that are credited courses that will save them money and at the same time will help them advance faster. So there's a number of programs, but the most important thing is understanding that this kind of collaboration is key to a successful program for young people to be able to move through the whole chain of higher education.
Great. And as we go through this, I'm going to be asking each member of the panel for their key perspectives so that we can open up for a wider discussion. Brian Fitzgerald runs the Business Higher Education Forum. I guess you and your organization have been crucial about finding those partnerships and thinking about the granular definition of skills.
Yeah, so we're a membership organization of CEOs and universities, and so this partnership notion is in our DNA. We focus very intensively on trying to get inside the skills gap and not look at jobs, but look through the lens of skills. So for example, when Judy was talking about data science, we did an analysis with PwC that showed that there were 2.35 million jobs that demand some level of data science and analytic skills. I think the problem is that partnerships are not functioning as well as they could. I think there's a misunderstanding of the high skills versus the low skill jobs. There's a misspecification at the skill level. And I think there's a misalignment at the partnership level that many times are too tactical and too transactional.
So business too short term.
And too short term. And what we try to do is promote strategic engagement by business with higher ed
and how are you using technology to sort of look at that?
I'm sorry?
How are you using technology to sort of unpick market?
Well, we are using a firm called Burning Glass Technology that maintains a database of 100 or more million job postings. So we are literally taking the signals from the job market to get inside those jobs and understand the skills. We work with our member companies then to create competency maps, both generally in data science, for example, but also in engineering, in financial services, et cetera, because they relate to partnerships that touch different parts of colleges and universities.
Fantastic. So let me pick up on that, and I'm going to raise a question here with Margaret Spellings. And Margaret, as you know, has got a distinguished history in government, former Secretary of Education, now runs UNC. So Margaret, when you hear that question of signaling and very granular needs, and as we look back and we think about Eduardo and the sort of the bridges that he's building, and Judy and the question of the gap, here you are at UNC. What do you see the evolution of higher ed to meet this sort of signaling and the new demands? What are the challenges and the opportunities that you've got to open it out?
Well, I think we need to think much more about the user, whether it's the student or the business community. And I think for too long we've designed our systems for ourselves, very decentralized kind of models. If we build it, they will come, was the notion. And when we look at our financial aid systems and our scholarship systems and our articulation agreements, or often lack of articulation agreements between our community colleges, our relationships with high schools, our relationships with the business community, and on and on and on, we're very siloed. And we need to do a much better job of understanding what our user needs and making it easier to facilitate these pathways for students. And I think we can do that through clarity around what the needs of the marketplace are, but also through advising and customization of platforms and data that allow students to get in and get out quickly. But we are barely beginning to do that, honestly. Right. And I look in North Carolina, and we have a lot of work to do on articulation between our community colleges and the university in particular.
And so if you had a single priority out of all of those things, if you had one particular nut that you'd crack that would begin to open up your ability to be flexible in the way that you'd like, what would that be?
Well, I think and this is heresy in higher education, I think we need to centralize some of this information gathering and some of the entry platforms for students. So if you're trying to navigate, a multitude of financial aid systems, plus the federal aid systems, plus your own major, it's a crazy quilt that is often just daunting for students, and before they even think about starting, they say, this is too complicated, I can't do it. So I think we need to centralize the on-ramp and make it easier for people to enter the door.
Right, so simplify the way in,
yes.
and therefore help people make choices.
Right, and that requires us to break down a lot of structures that we love.
We're going to come back to that. And then finally, Jamie, running Lumina obviously now for almost a decade, sort of one of the most respected commentators on the evolution of the whole space. We've talked about articulation agreements. We've talked about skills and needs. You've written extensively on talent and its requirements and how we map that. When you look at this area, what's the key observation you'd want everybody here to sort of understand, to take away? What's their walk away?
I want to underscore what Judy mentioned in her remarks, which is that there is a rising demand for talent in the United States. And our ability to meet that rising demand for talent, I think it's not hyperbole to say that will define our prosperity here in the 21st century as a country. We need more talent to power our economy, to strengthen our democracy, to ensure social stability. So talent really is the key to our success. Now, if you approach it from the perspective of the worker, of the individual, their ability to develop and deploy their own talent is going to dictate whether or not they get that good job and they lead that good life that comes from being more talented. 2/3 of the jobs being created today, though, require some form of post-high school learning, some credential beyond high school. And yet today, only about 45% of Americans hold one of those credentials. So we have this big gap, which is why you see this enormous premium that employers like Siemens will pay for people with skills, because they need people to manage their companies, to run their businesses in ways that will make them be more successful. The problem from the individual perspective is that system is, as Margaret pointed out, pretty much a mess. It's a mess in higher education because we aren't allowing enough of the people who start to actually finish. We create barriers to their entry in terms of inadequacy of financial aid and poor preparation. And we don't give them pathways to employment, at least in clear ways, that we think they need after their collegiate experience. And then there's that whole sector of learning that happens after high school that we tend to not talk as much about. We say, well, there's workforce programs or there's something like that. But from the perspective of the individual, the worker, it's all post-high school learning. There's a continuum. And the problem with the system is that none of those credentials, the certifications you might get for a specific job, the certificate you might earn, the badges that you might get, the degrees you might earn, none of them are part of an interconnected system that will actually allow that individual to connect what they know and be able to apply it in what they do.
So, I mean, I guess as I look down there, the question that we've got is how do we balance this list of commands and demands? And there's a huge pressure, and everybody talks about the top end, the digital skills, the cybersecurity skills. But I think, Judy, you've been very articulate about those middle skills. And how does that relate then to competency and the need to develop?
So we believe we have a responsibility. I think the only way we're all going to move forward is to work together. Academia, industry, who really, we define the demand signal, as well as the government in appropriate places. We believe that when you talk about digital, even the manufacturing technician on the shop floor is working with a microprocessor somewhere. That's what is running our numeric controls. That's what's the intellect that's running our robots today and all of our advanced manufacturing. And we're experiencing a tremendous manufacturing renaissance right now in this country. So what we've done is we've actually brought over the apprenticeship model from Germany and been very successful. We share that model with everyone. We actually developed a playbook with the National Association of Manufacturers, Alcoa, Dow, and Siemens, so that anyone can replicate this. But basically, a student comes from high school, comes to work for us part-time, gets an associate's degree over a 4-year period, works for us part-time, fully paid, no student debt. When they graduate, they have that associate's degree, they have a journeyman certificate, and they have a guaranteed job with us. And I'm proud to say this year we've doubled the program. We now do this in 8 states, and we are happy to share that playbook, which is online for anyone, as well as our experience. And there are many companies that are now applying this in all STEM fields, but there is an absolute need. There's 6 million openings right now in our country. There's an absolute need post-high school for middle skills that don't require a baccalaureate degree. And we have to fill that gap.
It's fascinating, and obviously you're doing a wonderful job there in the construct of a large company where you can take people through. Large chunks of the economy are sort of broken into small, middle-sized enterprise who don't have that flexibility. And I'm thinking now, you know, there's an awful lot in the press about us coming to driverless trucks. But right now, there is a huge gap of truck drivers. And I guess as I look at Eduardo at the end, you know, how does the higher ed system pick up and support people who are going to have to reskill? Because we're going to have to fill those truck driver jobs. And then we know that it's inevitable that 5, 10, whatever it is, 15 years down the road, those will be gone. What evolution do you need in your institution to be able to cope with that recycling?
Well, I think it takes several things to come into place. Number one, I think for those of us who are state-funded institutions, I think the state needs to look at this kind of work as an investment, not as an expense. And unfortunately, we have seen a declining in funding at the state level for most of the state institutions who need the resources to be able to build upon these programs. But again, I think it requires the participation and collaboration with business who are suffering because they don't find the qualified employees. Now, Judy was talking about the program of, how you call it, apprenticeships. For that to really work here, and I was invited by the German government to go and visit several firms in Germany a couple of years back to learn about that system. But it will require basically the American business changing the culture of the organization to be able to understand and to be able to support that kind of system. Not all businesses are really inclined to participate and invest on a student for 4 years at this point. And so that is key. One of the things that we find is that, for example, in our case, we're an open door institution. So we believe that talent is universal and that we can harness that talent. And many of the students have not received enough career orientation and possibilities in order to make the right choices. And I think that's why you see so many students changing majors once they get into the institution, because they haven't had. So again, we're working very closely with the schools. So the students beginning in the 9th grade, they begin to have that kind of an exposure, bringing them to the college. We go, and not only the students, but the parents. Mm-hmm. The parents have very fixed notions of what are the careers and things that the children should go to, because we have this idea that, the satisfaction of the student as an employee, as a professional, is not as important as the money they're going to make. And I think we need to bring a balance into that and a better understanding for the students to know of what they need for the future. The other thing that we're doing basically is understanding that the way the students learn today is very different from the way they used to learn before. So changing the pedagogy, changing the way that we interact with the students is important. The whole idea of a 50-minute lecture every 3 days a week, it has to go away. We need to make sure our education is more interactive, that the students are able to participate, more participatory. One of the things that we have tried at the college very successfully is project-based learning. And whether it's in the science or whether it's sociology or any other field, identifying issues that the students can work on, that they can be problem solvers, which is what business is looking for. They're looking for employees who are problem solvers, who come into the business and are able to help with innovation. Because as you said, Judy, innovation and creativity are the key to success. How do you support that talent and how you harness that talent is key.
Right. So we're hearing a lot about the needs and the need for change, but Brian, you're seeing these gaps persisting, and why? What's wrong? We have a market-based economy. The signal goes out. We're meant to be able to be flexible. What are the rigidities that you're trying to unwind? And I'm going to pick that up with
I don't think it's rigidity as much as lack of actionable insights and information. And that's a problem that we try to address. I think, for example, if you were mentioning digital skills, I think if I asked for a show of hands here, most in the audience would equate digital skills with high skills. And I think we have to unpack that and understand, as Judy was saying, what are the skills of the apprenticeships? Yep. Digital skills are using highly sophisticated machines, robots, computers, et cetera. And for example, of those 3.5 million jobs that require data analytics skills, over half of them are functional jobs. Computer scientists, the data scientists, only 2% of all of the 2.35. So we have to understand the distribution of those skills. We really see a democratization of skills. There are more jobs for skills that have previously been locked up in the highly rarefied STEM fields that are now infusing the job market. Yeah. And we need to make sure that higher ed is nimble enough to embed those skills in a whole variety of different undergraduate experiences.
Well then, let me pick that up with you, Margaret.
Yeah, and I think we need to think about how we do that in kind of a la carte ways.
Right.
Where we have micro-credentials and badging and certifications and things like that really meet those needs. And the other value that we need to talk more about with our students is the use of time. We talk about, Eduardo's example speaks to me about being very inefficient, finding your way and wasting time in higher education, which of course wastes money, requires people to take more debt, on and on and on. So how can we package learning skills in ways that are very user-friendly and very efficient, so that one of the things we're looking at, some states have done this, Texas has recently done this, is a 120-hour baccalaureate degree. Why do we have 147-hour baccalaureate degrees? That's, sometimes you need it, but not always. I mean, obviously there are some examples, but let's think about how to slice and dice our offerings in a way that show immediate return for the business community and the student.
And do you think that would also be a part of bridging the gap that is beginning to emerge between society and higher ed, where some parts of society are beginning to think higher ed's just not related to me?
Absolutely. You and I were talking about the recent Pew poll, where a majority of Republicans that think that higher education is now part of the problem in our country and not part of the solution. Very disturbing trend. And I think it's because often they don't see the immediate value and return for that investment of time and money in the bottom line of their own household. I also want to use this opportunity just to say quickly a thank you to Judy, because we, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, is one of the partners with Siemens, and so appreciate her for that.
Great, thank you. Jamie, so...
Yeah, I just want to key off of what Margaret said, because I think it's very important here that higher education is playing catch-up. Let's be honest, that for too long, higher education, much of higher education said to us, we don't prepare people for jobs, we prepare them for life. It's somebody else's task to prepare them for jobs. And unfortunately, what we've come to realize too late is that they're one and the same thing, that the things that you're going to learn to be successful in work and in life have to do with collaboration, communication, teamwork, all of those things, and then knowledge within specific spheres, within specific knowledge spheres that you can apply using those generalizable skills. Well, that's what higher education should be doing, can do, and needs to execute better on. So it's one of the reasons why these examples that Eduardo and Margaret and Brian have been talking about are very good, but they are also still exceptions to the broader trend in the field. And what we need is scale out of these efforts. There's a reason why people like Eduardo and Margaret show up on all of these panels. It's because they're really busy because they're creating a lot of change. But if we had thousands of college and university presidents doing what they're doing, then we'd be able to transform the system. Unfortunately, the incentives aren't in place, David, for them to be able to do that. Our funding mechanisms for public higher education don't always incent those kind of outcomes. We don't do a particularly good job in holding colleges and universities accountable in other ways. We have these poor measures like U.S. News and World Report that don't do a good job of actually describing what the outcomes are of higher education. And so left to their own devices, they're going to keep doing what they've always doing. The path of least resistance is a common phenomenon, including in higher education. So putting more pressure on the system from the perspective of employers, and to the extent that public policy is useful here, particularly state policy, I think we can use state policy in order to be able to do that. But we've got to come back to the central point here that this is not a nice to have, this is a gotta have. The talent need for the country is too important for us to say, we will trust you and let you do what you've always been doing.
And Jamie, Lumen has been very articulate on the problem of college completion. And I think it's always surprising to people to just understand how severe that is. I mean, would you like to share sort of the aggregate completion?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that on aggregate, 2 out of every 5 people who starts a college degree of some type never completes that credential, ever. Never finishes. And if you look at the gaps by race and income, if you're poor, if you're African American, if you're Latino, your chances of completing are even lower. So now we've seen some progress in the last few years on some of those measures, but they are fairly modest. After years of sort of staticness, vibrating in place, as I like to call it, we've finally seen some improvement in that. But the reality is that too many people who started never finished, and there's a big societal consequence of that. We have lost the investment in their potential. They have debt and often don't have higher income in order to be able to show for it. And we run into a situation where their ability to then get ahead is hampered.
Fantastic. So as we're coming to the last few minutes, and I know Eduardo's going to leave in any minute, but I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just share if they had one thing that you'd take away, just one thing that would be their priority for you to take away. And we'd start with Eduardo, and then we'll come back towards me. Eduardo, what's your one wish when you wake up in the morning?
I want to bring the higher ed system into the 21st century. The reality is in America, we're lucky to have the best higher education system in the world. But our system is not meeting the needs of the 21st century. It's as simple as that, and we need to be honest about it. It's a system that served very well the 20th century, where we only needed to train a few people, was very elitist, continues to be very elitist. But most Americans could go into offices and factories, make a good wage, and achieve the American dream. They will be middle class, be able to own a home, et cetera, and being a job for 30 years. All that has changed. Today, Americans change jobs about 8 to 10 times during their productive life. If you don't have, as you said, if you don't have a post-secondary credential, you stay in the cycle of poverty for the rest of your life.
Right.
And what we really need is to democratize the higher education system. The fact that, if you don't have that credential, you are doomed for life. We need to make sure that we do the same thing we did 100 years ago. The big question 100 years ago was whether we should make higher school education a universal right for every American. We won the argument that, yes, we should do it. And that single act was responsible for the preponderance of America in the 20th century. We're losing ground. We used to have the best educated workforce in the world. We're losing ground to many other countries. So how you change that? I am an advocate for universal right to higher education. because that's the only way that we're going to be able to achieve the same thing we achieve Now, we also have to change. We have to change pedagogy. We need to change many of the things that we do. And we need to retrain our faculty, give them a chance to professionally come into the 21st century. We have wonderful people, well-trained, but frankly, many of the lectures that we get today in our classroom, students can get even more actualized by pushing a button in their cell phone.
Got it.
So there is a lot to be done, but I'm very hopeful about the future because I feel more and more we're recognizing that all this is possible. It takes will, it takes determination. That's my wish.
So we wish you well on your way back, and obviously as you're preparing, I guess, for Maria.
Thank you. Please excuse me, but I really have to go.
So,
thank you.
Judy, what's your one breath?
The one takeaway is really simple, and I hope everybody remembers it. Digital is the great equalizer. It provides an opportunity for everyone, whether it's a field service technician who's going to be doing repairs differently, someone in a manufacturing floor, or some scientist somewhere. And it's going to impact all of our lives. It already does in today's economy.
Yep.
I agree with scale, but we also think that industry has a critical role to play in this, and implementation is local.
Great. Jamie, your one policy prescription or other?
Yeah, in fact, I would say public policy is an unreliable partner in the current environment. So as someone who spent his career in public policy, I'm here to tell you, don't count on public policy to solve our problems. I think public-private partnership is really the key here. And public-private partnership means listening to the employers, understanding what higher education can and can't produce, helping them actually do a better job at what we know they can do well. I think that's really key. And it's important, not just for the reasons that I mentioned before, which is that individuals will do better and we will all share in their prosperity, but it's also good for the bottom line for companies. And one of the reasons why I'm so impressed with the efforts of companies like Siemens is that they've figured out that improving the capacities of their workers not only helps their workers be more successful, but it improves their bottom line. The ROI to the return on investment of education and training is real, it's measurable. We've done studies on this. We did one, for example, with Cigna that showed 129% return on the investment of their expenditures on employee education and training. That means for every dollar they invested, they got $1.29 back in employee cost savings through recruitment savings, retention, and higher promotion. So it is literally a win-win for the public and the private by investing in learning.
Fantastic. Margaret, I've got to resist the temptation to say, what's your prescription for your successor? What's your one breath?
We need to put our money where our mouths are, and at risk of contradicting my dear friend Jamie, particularly at the state level, I do think we can look very closely at our funding models, which really incent graduate level education at the expense of, we say we want more first generation completers from low income groups, but where the big bucks are at the graduate level and often online. And so that's why when you drive down the highway, you see a plethora of online MBA programs growing everywhere because they're money sources for our universities. Not so at our lower levels. And so that's where we need to muscle up and put our money where our mouths are.
Fantastic. Brian, you're getting the chance to sum up for us all.
Well, I was going to say world peace, but
in 52 seconds.
I think that's going on.
That's going on another session.
Yes, I got misplaced here. No, I think it's, I agree with Jamie. We have designed our entire strategy without a public policy component to it, rather to lead by example. And I think the one problem that we want to focus on is the partnership model. It's often too tactical, too transactional, and what we're trying to build are deep, sustained partnership with good market intelligence around skills as proof points for CEOs like Judy, peers, and for policymakers.
Right.
But let's build the proof points first, and then try to scale and engage policy.
Thank you. Well, look, hope you'll join me in thanking our panel. We've got a huge subject to have covered, and thank you to a great panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.